All right, so we've been talking about meeting corners with adjacent corners, and in this one, I played some randoms against myself where I just took random cards for each color and then played out games. And it's basically just a longer analysis than taking, a position further into the game because you do it from the start, but you also commit to one line and have to decide at each moment rather than analyzing all the offshoots extendedly. So in the 10 games I played against myself, I did one for each level. I played a corner starter in 7 of the games and replied to it with an adjacent corner in 3 of those games, making that the most frequent opening type of any of the games I played. Which is to say, I really do like these moves, and I think my series so far has been a bit like focusing on the dangers of them, because I think they're inherently very appealing, especially for someone like me who started by playing closed non-combo quite extensively, where I think they are in general the best choice of how to meet a corner starter. And so I came over with a really strong bias towards them and wanted to highlight that they are perhaps more dangerous than they seem, because to me they always seemed very appealing, but they are, very possible to lose with. But then I wanted to switch it up and show that I really do like these moves, and I like how they work, and I think they're strong, and in my own games, I choose them quite regularly, and playing myself, at least in this 10 game sample, it is the move type I chose more than any other. So I'm going to go over the 3 games, just talk about what I thought, not do really extensive calculations, but talk about the positions and try to sort of figure out how they work and explain what I was thinking, and go over where I made mistakes if I made them, which I did. So in each game, red's going to be the first turn player, and blue will be the second turn player. In this game, red begins with 6, 7, 8, 7, and 9, which is a move I really like. It's, of course, I'm going to be playing my types of starters, but it's sort of a move that says, okay, I don't have anything really obvious here. Let's make a move that's just a little trickier for you to handle than it is me. And if you start looking at blue's captures, you'll see where the problem is. For instance, if we check captures in 8, there are only 2, Tifa and Quina. Tifa, 68A5, can be plus walled from 7 by his loot A873, while Quina can be plus walled by 3998. So both captures from 8 are a little uncomfortable to make because red threatens combos immediately in reply. And if we look at 6, you're going to see the same thing. There are 3 ways to capture, but 2 of them have a 6 up, and both of those can be same walled by 5A68, and one of them is an A up, which can be plus walled by the 3998. So it's quite tricky for blue to fight against this corner, and of course they don't have to take immediately, and they probably should not take immediately, but it is one of those things where at some point they're probably going to try to start fighting that corner, and that's going to be somewhat difficult for blue. And on red's side, it is a lot easier to retake their corner. Every one of those cards can retake from 8, and all but one can retake from 6, including a same wall, which is the most secure way to recapture something because it can't be comboed back. The one kind of danger from red's side is it gives up one of their only cards that doesn't have an 8 to the left. So if red does have to recapture from 8, they may face some discomfort because their 8s to the left can be same walled by Quina, or same walled by Tifa, or plus walled by Tifa, depending where on the board it is. So I think that's the one real drawback of this move, is that red is left with very redundant numbers to the left, which blue is well equipped to deal with. And that means if blue was gonna take, they definitely want to take from 6. And there are some reasonable moves capturing from 6, I think, but not from 8, because red's recapture from 8 is much more difficult to pull off. So I looked at this position for a while from blue's perspective, and I wasn't finding a move I liked. I think there are decent options in 6, there are a couple options elsewhere, but there's not like a natural setup in 5, there's not a safe corner, there's not a corner that's just really easy for us to recapture but hard for red to capture. And then I spotted a move I quite like, which is the adjacent corner. So first of all, it's easy to retake. The 6, 7, 7, 8, and 7, 8, 2A, Furion and Quina, both have plus walls and 8 that can help secure it. It sets up L's, and that's really important, right? The thing we've talked about most with these adjacent corners is, does it have the capacity to set up an L against their blocking card in 6? And here it does, because most of their blocking cards in 6 have an 8 to the left. And if we play Furion in 2, we've already set up Quina to have a same in 5, so we will have that big threat in 5. And if we have that big threat in 5, L's are usually just excellent for second turn. I think something I haven't talked about much, but it's pretty important, especially for these kind of weak corners where red starts with a weak corner, which we can take, but none of the takes really work, is they need the combo back square, right? The reason we can't take from 6 is they can combo back in 3. And thus, it's kind of blocking 3 has this added benefit of we sort of had moves in 6, but not really. We sort of had threats there. Now we do have threats in 6, and we don't need new cards to do it. The cards we had are perfectly fine as long as 3 is blocked. So by blocking, like if you start calculating lines, and this is true much later in the game as well, and you notice my opponent just keeps having combos in this square. This square keeps being the death of me. You can find some really obscure but cool moves where, like, you know, say there are cards in, I don't know, 1, 7, 8, 9, right? And you just keep at the end of every line getting killed by some move in 3. They just have some, you know, corner card that just devastates you in 3 every time. It might be the case that you can just block 3 there. And this is a move that looks insane, but once you start, you know, calculating deep into lines, you can find this is just a huge problem square for me, and I need to make sure they don't get to play in it at the end of the line. And so this is, you know, a much easier example, a much less complex position on that front. But it's got the same sort of idea of I would like to have moves in 6, or at least threaten moves in 6, but I don't as long as they can play in 3. So I'm going to block 3. So I like that feature of this move. Another thing I really like about this move is it gets a dominated card out of our hand, right? Some of our cards are going to play well, some of our cards are going to play worse. In a vacuum, A4, 5, 9, looking at our hand, you might think that is the best or the second best card in our hand, or maybe the third best, but that's one of the better cards in our hand in general. But against their starter, it has very little power in that direction, and it is completely dominated by the 3, 9, 9, 8. Right? If it was to go in either 6 or 8, it would surrender a plus wall to that card, and we don't have good ways to take it back in those situations. So it's a card where whenever it comes down, they have a card that's going to play really well against it. It is unlikely to find a safe or a happy home. And that would matter less if we were on first turn, right? Because, okay, maybe not given the directionality of this game, but in general on first turn, one of your cards, like say I have Squall and you have Cypher, right? We have these two cards that are opposites. They play really well against each other. Whoever plays their card first will often set up the other card to have really powerful effects. First turn gets to play last, so they can hold on to that card for longer. Second turn can hold on to it as well. They could never play it from their hand, but that's going to reduce their options quite a bit. So I think getting this kind of card out of your hand matters on both, maybe matters a little more on second turn, I'm not sure. But it strikes me that this is the kind of card blue does not want in their hand, given the starter. And so and given red's opposing hand. So I like getting this out of the hand early. I think it does a lot of useful things. And then the last useful thing it does, and I think this is a kind of another neat feature, and maybe I'm now giving the move too much credit, but I think it does a lot of things, is we notice that 8 to the left problem red has, right? Where anytime they play a card in the middle row, in either 2, 5, or 8, one of their 3 cards with an 8 to the left, it can be same walled by Quina, which is really scary for them. And they're probably not going to have combo back options. So we want red to be playing as many of their turns in 2, 5, or 8 as we can. And to do that, we need cards to be on the right. Otherwise, they are not forced to go in those squares. They can play on the left. But if we start capturing things on the right, they're going to have to be recapturing back most of the time. And to do it, they're going to have to be playing more in that central column. And then secondly, we need to fill 7, 8, and 9, 3, 6, and 9 up. Because if they can play in 3, 6, or 9, we can of course not same wall them using Quina, because Quina needs to be touching the left wall to have the same wall. So what we really want is to fill up the 3, 6, and 9 squares and force red to start playing in 2, 5, and 8, because that's going to make them really vulnerable to combos. So I think this move does a lot of cool things, some of the stuff we've talked about. I think the most important thing is just it sets up a really good L. We have a really good way to recapture it from 2, and it sets up an L against whatever they put in 6. That is the key, that's what we've talked about. But it accomplishes some other things, and I think they're all kind of interesting, so I wanted to go through them. Now with red, I made the very conventional move here. 5A, 6A was a really strong card in that it dissuaded blue from being able to go in 6, or being able to attack their starter from that direction. Our starter now, I'll keep switching who I describe as me and who I describe as them, depending on whose move it is, because I played both sides of this game. But now that it doesn't have that powerful move in 3, it is a useful card to get out of Red's hand. It, of course, fits very nicely in 6. Sames are the safest ways to take, and in this case, it's both the same and a same wall on both cards. And it also just generally is the punish move if one of these adjacent corners isn't very good. So here, switching back to Blue's perspective, I spent a while on Tifa in 8. The obvious prepared move was 6, 7, 7, 8, and 2, but I thought Tifa was interesting because it's the more calculationally complex move, right? Furion in 2 just sets up a same in 5, and there's a same wall and a plus wall in 1. It looks very natural and good. There's not really much reason to consider other moves. But Tifa's a lot more complicated, so I thought it was fun to look at. It sets up a plus in 5. Now, a plus isn't as good as a same, but could be pretty powerful here. And it gives the opponent a plus wall in 7. And so the first line I wanted to check was, what happens if they play Islud in 7 and combo me? Well, I can play Mog back in 5, and they don't have any recombos, and I've just flipped a whole bunch of things. That looks really good for me. So is Tifa in 8 promising? They can't combo it immediately. But the worry is, they don't need to combo it immediately. What if they don't combo it now, but set up more combos, right? Their problem is, if they combo in 7, I can combo back in 5. But what if they also gave themselves a combo in 5, and then just left those squares open till the end? They'll have last turn, they'll get a big combo. So the move that immediately jumped out to me was Sephiroth in 2. And I looked at this a while ago, and I didn't recheck my notes before starting recording this video. And I don't have my notes up, so I don't actually remember what the tie is. But I eventually, Blue can tie there. I found a tie there. But the idea of Sephiroth in 2 is that 7 plus 6 equals 10 plus 3, so it sets up Islud to have the plus in both 5 and 7. But I found a tie there, and then I noticed, Sephiroth in 4 does the same thing. Islud again has that plus in both 5 and 7. And at this point I thought, okay, even if Blue can survive here, this is far too much effort when I have a much more natural move. I should not be spending this much time, like if it was an actual game where I had a time limit, on a move that is so impractical, where maybe it works and maybe it doesn't, but if it does work, I have to dodge a whole lot of bullets, and I'd rather just play the natural move, and given that I'm already seeing scary stuff, this is just not an efficient way to use one's time in an actual game. Now, it turns out that Blue can, in fact, and I only went and found this when I looked afterwards, Blue can survive Sephiroth in 4, as well as Sephiroth in 8. The win, and this shouldn't surprise us that there is a win, it's a very dangerous move, and it shouldn't surprise us. What's been the key concept in all these L's, right? It's been control of 5. Blue has a threat in 5, so Red needs to keep control of Blue's move in 5, and if they can, usually the best move is going to be in 7. Now, we already looked at A8, 7, 3, and 7 as response to Tifa in 8, but if we look again, we'll notice, what does Blue want to play in 5? A5, 7, 6, that's the plus. How can Red control it? Well, to control it, all Red has to do is keep A8, 7, 3 in their hand, because that will have a plus and 2 in response. So Red should play the highest outfacing value, the strongest card out of 7, that does not use up the A8, 7, 3, and the move is, of course, 8A, 3, 8 in 7, and this in fact wins. You'll notice it is safe, it captures a card, and it stops Blue from having good moves in 5. So it's no surprise that Tifa loses. I thought the different variations were kind of interesting and fun to explore, and feel free to, look at them yourself and find the ties against Sephiroth in 2 and 4, but it was not an efficient use of time. Alright, so I played the obvious move, and L has a threat, this L that Blue set up has a threat in 5, it has the same in 5, so Red is basically forced to block, and when that's the case, and we have a good way to recapture from 1, we also have captures in 8. This is going to be very promising for Blue. Red is usually forced to block and really needs to be careful to find a tie a lot of the time. So I feel this is a pretty good spot for Blue. And I did find a tie with Red. I blocked in 5, and here you can pause and look for ties for Blue. There are like 3 maybe. I ended up finding the cutest one, so I'm a little proud of myself, but there are a bunch of ties to find. And, the one little tricky part is that Red's cards do play pretty well here. So I thought this was a cute move. I played A5, 7, 6, and 4, which of course sets up a safe square in 1, so Red would like to occupy that square, but whichever card they use, they give up the ability to plus wall one of our cards, right? Because both our cards have a double capture in 8, and each of their cards can plus wall back, can combo back one of those cards for 8. But now they're kind of obliged to block 1, and when they do so, we get to play an 8 with the card they can no longer combo. So if they play Vormav in 1, Islud in 1, A873, then of course we play Tifa in 8, and they only have the single capture at the end. Well, if they play 3998 in 1, we of course play Quina, and again, they only have the single capture at the end. So I thought this was a fun way to finish the game. So moving on to game 2, I guess, is there anything else to say about game 1? I think this is just a really cleanly executed L. Right? We had this move in 3, this adjacent corner, that we could comfortably take back, that we'd be able to set up the threat in 5, and the first turn player had to find a block in 5 to be able to hold the tie here. And I don't know, I mean, I'm not saying red was under a ton of pressure here, but I think this was kind of everything blue wanted out of this adjacent corner was given by it. And it was a genuinely, I think, somewhat tough starter to meet. I think it was a pretty good starter, and I think this was a very clean, comfortable way to handle it and reach a tie. Sorry, the next game. Now here, this red move is kind of the same idea as the last starter. It's just like, I don't have a safe corner, I don't have some obvious side setup. I don't have some obvious card to stick in 5 that sets up lots of synergies or gets a terrible card out of my hand. So what I want to do is play the corner that is trickiest for you to take while being not difficult for me to recapture. And this corner is vulnerable from 8. Blue has 3 ways to take it from 8, but they only have 2 ways to take it from 4, and both of them have an 8 up, which Maken, 6975, can combo back from 1. So again, this is just, I'm going to just put a little discomfort on my opponent and try to work from there. Just make moves that are harder for them to deal with than they are for me to recapture. And you'll notice Maken is also good at recapturing from 4. So I don't know why it says here the 8 is tricky for blue, but I hope you get the idea. The 8 up, right? The 8 up is tricky for blue because blue does not have a way to capture it that cannot be comboed back. And so looking at this position for a bit, again, I thought the position was a little tricky, but what I eventually did was go for the adjacent corner and with the plan of setting up an L. So I played 547A and 1. And again, this attacks the stronger side, right? It attacks the side we have more difficulty taking, and the problem with it was, if we go in 4, they can combo us from 1. If we block 1, now we do have the threats in 4, and both our cards with the 8 up that wouldn't fit in 4 now go there well. The other thing this does, it is a very weak number facing out, which may seem vulnerable or weak, but actually means we just have lots of L options, right? The weaker that number is, the more cards we can put in 2 while recapturing it if needed. And here we may not have to recapture it. You'll notice red has only 1 card they can put in 4 that takes it, and that card is very weak, and red generally wants a high number facing towards 5 to make it harder for us to set up Ls that threaten that card. So red is unlikely to use Odin in 4, because that would be a very easy card for us to retake. And also, that's a very powerful card, especially with the game directed left, and it's definitely the kind of card they want to keep in their hand as long as they can. Now, we don't actually, with our specific hand, have that many ways to recapture from 2, because we kind of have a left problem. But that also means if they don't take us, and they are kind of unlikely to take us from 4, because Odin is their only card to do it, we can lock our card in with Carbuncle or Golbez, 8-4-A-4 or 8-8-9-1 and 2. So we kind of have some benefits there as well, where the problem with having a weak number facing out is we usually have to overpower it, and that can be vulnerable to combos. But here, they're kind of unlikely to take it, so we're probably not going to be that vulnerable to combos. So okay, same idea as last time. We use the adjacent corner to attack more powerfully the side that is harder for us to take. Here we had 2 ways to take it, but neither of them were safe. But now we could play either of them without being comboed back. And we're likely to have good L potential. And you'll notice red isn't that powerful to the right. We have the 7-2-7A, which means we're probably going to have a good chance to play a move in 5. Though if we look a little more closely, that card is comboed 2 different ways by something in 8. So we do have an A to the left, and that's going to make it harder for them to play safely in 4. But they might have it because they have so many combo back options. So again, with red, I made the very conventional move. This is the block with high out facing. Try to make the L as hard to do as possible. And I think this would be a good time to pause and think about what L you'd set up. There are probably a bunch of functional L's. I just picked one I liked more. But feel free to pause and look. Of course, remember you have L's in both 2 and 8. So I went with 9, 7, 2, 8, and 2. What I liked about this is it set up the plus and 5 with 8, 8, 9, 1, kind of a goofy plus. And also we have the ability to plus wallet in 3, and they do not, which I thought was a nice, useful thing. And so what happens when we reach the L? Well, the question should always be, can they block 5? And if they can't, what can they play in 3 that can, or do they have to block 5, right? And because if they have to block 5, the L player is going to be in good shape. Or can they get away with a move in 3 and control the 5 square? Of course, yes, there are occasionally moves in 6 and 8 and 9, but we're focusing on the very thematic main lines of these positions. And the answer is blue has 2 moves, 2 cards they can put in 5. They have 2 threats in 5, right? Blue threatens 8, 8, 9, 1 in 5 and 7, 2, 7, A in 5. 7, 2, 7, A in 5 is already under control because red has 2 different ways to plus wallet from 8. And having 2 ways to plus wallet is important because it means whatever card they put in 3, they'll still have a card left over, even if it's one of those 2 that has the plus wall in 8. So really the only card threatening anything in 5 is 8, 8, 9, 1. So how can red play a move in 3 that controls that move in 5? And I think the answer is pretty straightforward. 6, 6, A, 4 has the A down, which sets up Odin to have a plus in 6 if blue goes in 5. So blue has both 2 ways to capture the card in 4 from 5, but both of them are comboed back. And I think this puts some pressure on blue and means red in general got, I think, a slight advantage out of this opening. But blue has ties. And feel free to look and find one. The one I played was 8, 4, A4 in 5. There's probably others. Key point is if they take us from 6, we can recapture from 9 with the A out facing, and they won't be able to take that back. And if they play in 8, we can just go in 6 with a high number facing down, and they don't have any good setups in 9. So I think overall red had a little more pressure here because blue had to be a bit careful at the end. But overall, mostly thematic moves from both players. You know, both of these games followed the main line we've now grown to know and hopefully love of corner, adjacent corner, blocking square, set up the L, and then do they have to block 5 or can they go in the corner? And all the lines we've seen, they either block 5 or go in the corner. And that led to reasonable results in both games where I think both sides played well. So now we move on to game 3. So this is going to be another mid-strength corner starter because that's my jam. And this one was 2, 8, 4, 6. Same thing as always. This time, red can recapture from 8 while blue has no recapture at all. And thus, an adjacent corner appeals as a way, okay, I can attack the starter from 9 and set up something against the side I can't normally take. You'll notice that the only way red has to recapture is 8, 2, 4, 6. So if you paid attention to the videos about capturing the opponent's starter, your brain should start going, ooh, I can force them to have an 8 facing up. So if I play in 4, they play in 8, maybe I can play in 9, and that 8 facing up will be safe, and I could have a promising position. And I think that's another reasonable idea. I'm sure there are other good moves, but that's one I kind of hope if you watch these videos that noticing, oh, they only have the one way to take back from 8, and that is a high number facing 5? Interesting. Maybe I'll capture their starter. Now, I don't love capturing their starter here because we have those 2 cards with an abysmal 2 facing down, and those cards feel really painful in a downward directed game. So I'd really like to get one of them out of my hand, and thus 6628 gets one of our cards with a weak down facing number out of our hand. We're on second turn, so there is quite a decent chance at this point that 7727 stays in our hand for the entire game and is never played. It sets up us to have the plus an 8, which finds a use for the 7727. It actually is a threat. You'll notice red does not have that threat. And then the only thing we need is to have L options, but we have lots of captures in 4, and they cannot capture us from 8, so we could put any of our 4 cards in 6 if they block 8, so we should have ample L options here. I think my one little flaw here was I didn't actually look at the L's here. I just kind of assumed that with so many possibilities, any of our 4 cards in 6 and 3 of our 4 cards in 4, that we were like basically guaranteed to have an L. But it turns out we actually don't have that comfortable an L. So red plays the blocking move with the high outfacing value towards 5, making it harder to set up an L. And it's tough to get an L working here because none of our cards can set up such that we have a threat in 5 that doesn't concede a lot. Because the only move that does give us an L that has a threat in 5 is 4-8-6-5, which gives us the same in 5 with 1-2-8-8, but it gives them a plus in 5 with 6-8-3-3, and that's just going to be devastating. So I don't know. I think this is a good position to look at and try to find the best L. I didn't, I will say. Was my mistake in these series of games, is I did not find an adequate L to hold a tie. So hopefully you do better than I did. But I found it quite a tricky spot. So I ended up going with the easiest card to recapture. It doesn't threaten something in 5, but I went with something, okay, when they go 1, I'll be able to go 5. I have 3 different ways to recapture it. I'll be able to find a good move in 5. But we don't threaten the double capture in 5, so red should go 1, and they should try to control as many of our moves in 5 as they can. And in fact, 6-8-3-3 is both safe, we can't take it, and really controls our options in 5. Because 3-6-8-4 was already plus walled from 2 with 1-6-8-7. 7-7-2-7 is now plussed from 2. The 8 to the right from their card in 1 now sets up a plus. And 4-8-5-6 is just taken from 2, and we can't really take very much back at the end. So 4-8-6-5, they go 1-6-8-7 and 2, and anything they take, they will be able to take back at the end, and we're going to lose this one. So yeah, it's a tough position. And I looked for a while here, and I couldn't find a tie for blue, and there isn't one. And it turns out I did the wrong L. And I think my L made some sense, but red was too capable of controlling 5, and it didn't work. So if we look, the best is actually 1-2-8-8 and 6, which is a really hard move to find. I don't blame myself too much for not seeing it, though of course I would like to play perfectly. But the key is that they have worse cards for 3 than they did for 1, right? When I played it in 4, they had a really good card to put in 1 that set up a plus wall against my best option for 5. Here, they have cards for 3, but they're not as good, right? So if we go 1-2-8-8 and 6, and they have a 7 to the left, like on 1-6-8-7, we can plus wall that with our 3-6-8-4, and anything else they put in 3, at least it will be vulnerable, right? At least we're going to have a recapture option. But the reason this is really hard to find is because it gives us nothing at all in 5. We can't even single take anything. But it turns out being able to single take in 5 wasn't good enough here, as we saw from the move in 4, and thus attacking their card in 3 after we play in 6 is going to be the more promising option. So I thought that was an interesting example of 2 wells that worked pretty well. One that I think gave the second turn player a little bit of an advantage, a chance to push for a win. The other one, which was basically even, maybe a slight advantage to the first turn player. And then a third game where the L looked really promising, but I had no specific plan, and it didn't work well because I didn't, in fact, have a good L. And to find the tying move in 6 was really a hard move to find, and I put myself in a tough situation because I hadn't thought ahead. They're going to put an 8 up and 8. How can I make sure I can set up against that card? And because I didn't think ahead, I chose an L that didn't work very well. And yeah, so I hope this shows both kind of the strengths of when an adjacent corner does well and some more reasons why you might choose it. Blocking a square that the opponent is going to have high combo potential on can be really valuable, but also why it can be kind of dangerous and not too dangerous looking positions. In this game, the opponent's starter did not look very intimidating. Their follow-up with this 8 up, this position, just doesn't look that scary. We have, all these L options in 6 and 4, but that we really have to calculate more specifically than I did here, I think is pretty important. And so those are 3 games I played with adjacent corners. I think they were pretty well played games. I only made 1 mistake over the 3, but I think they also showed the dangers and the strengths and why these moves really appeal to me against starters that I think are somewhat tricky to face. So this might be my last coverage of the adjacent corner play. I think I'm going to move on to distant sides next time. So meeting 1 and 6 or 8. But I hope you found this interesting coverage.